Hello, my name is Christiane Kuhn and I'm going to present you our new paper, Breaking and Partially Fixing Provable Secure Onion Routing. And the results that I'm going to present are joint work together with Beck and Thorsten Strufe. So, let's start with an example. This is Alice. Alice has made some critical findings that she would like the public to know about. However, she cannot send these findings directly to a publication site, as this might be controlled by the government, and she fears that thereby her adversary would learn her identity. So, instead, she uses Tor to hide her identity from the receiver. The underlying principle of Tor and other onion routing and mixed networks is the following. Instead of having each sender sending the message directly to the receiver, the message is sent over multiple relays and encrypted for each of these. Such that, finally, as long as one of the relays is honest, an adversary cannot learn who the sender of a certain message was or who was talking to who. Note that for our illustrations we will always use yellow boxes for honest relays and red boxes for adversarial ones. Now, Tor is the most popular example that uses this underlying technique, but there are more onion routing and mixed networks that use the same idea, and I especially show you these four because they have a formal privacy proof. However, we were able to find an attack on these systems that allows a colluding first relay and receiver to identify the sender and even learn part of the message. Now, this raises a lot of questions. First of all, how does the attack even work? Secondly, well, those systems have been proven secure. How can there be an attack and what went wrong in the proofs? And last but not least, how can we avoid such flaws in the future? And those three questions will also guide us through the rest of the talk. So let's start with how the attack works. Before I can describe this to you, we need to understand a little bit about one of the attacked systems. So we're going to talk about HORNET for a moment. HORNET's onions consist of a header and a payload. The header contains the path information, while the payload carries the message. And now both the information in the header and payload is encrypted in a clever way, such that each relay on the path only learns the next hop it has to send the onion to, and only the final receiver gets to see the message. There are two more things we need to learn about HORNET, and the first thing is the integrity protection. So each relay on the path will check the header for integrity, but only the final receiver can check that the message has not been modified. Further, the payload is encrypted with a block cipher in CBC mode. This means one block of the plain text is responsible for one block of the ciphertext, and especially if we modify one block of the ciphertext, it will only change one block of the plain text. And with this knowledge, we can have a look at the attack. So let's first see what is going on here. If the adversary is behaving according to the protocol, then at the first relay, he gets to see Alice's onion consisting of a header and a payload, and the onion will be processed further until finally the adversary, as the corrupted receiver, will be able to retrieve the message from the payload. However, he will not know which of the senders sent the message. But what the adversary could do instead is flipping a bit of the payload in the beginning, so as the first relay. Now the onion is sent to the honest relay, but as the header has not been modified, the integrity check of the relay will go through and the onion is processed further, until it finally reaches the receiver. Now we know that the payload has been modified, but based on the block cipher, we also know that only the beginning of the message will be affected. So now the adversary gets a message that in the beginning looks like garbage, which is why we call this attack the garbage attack. But the end of it looks like a normal message that he would expect. For example, English language. Now he knows the sender normally would never send him garbage in the beginning of the message, and thus it must have been the onion that he modified in the beginning, so it must have been Alice who wanted to contact this receiver. And even further, he knows part of the message that Alice wanted to send to this receiver. So this is bad news for HORNET, as it violates their privacy goals and lies well within the adversary model. And I have more bad news. Even for related systems, the same attack works to some extent. Only for HORNET and Sphinx it violates their model. This brings us to our natural next question. What went wrong? How can there even be such a flaw in those systems if they were proven secure? And therefore we need to understand a little bit about the proof technique. 15 years ago, Camenisch and Lysyanskaya defined an ideal security for onion routing from a cryptographical point of view. This means, for the moment, we have to ignore all traffic analysis and timing attacks, as we cannot protect against them with cryptographical methods, but we just focus on getting the onion routing or mix packet format correctly from a cryptographical point of view. Of course, later on we need additional measures against traffic analysis and timing attacks, but this is an orthogonal problem. So as this ideal security for onion routing would be hard to prove in itself, Camenisch and Lysyanskaya also proposed 4 properties which they claim to imply the ideal security, and those 4 properties are onion correctness, onion integrity, onion security, and rep resistance. Now, if you want to prove your onion routing or mixed network packet format secure, you simply have to prove those 4 properties. So now that we know how the proof strategy works, let's see what went wrong in the proofs. Well, first of all, while proving these onion properties, some details, like oracles, have been overlooked or adapted, both resulting in actually proving weaker properties than proposed by Camenisch and Lysyanskaya. Further, also the properties proposed by Camenisch and Lysyanskaya are indeed too weak to imply the ideal security. So, how can we avoid such flaws going forward? Well, of course we need to pay attention to all the details of the properties in our privacy proofs. But, more importantly, we need new onion routing properties that indeed imply the ideal security. And we define such properties in our paper. Right now, I would like to give you a rough idea of how the properties work, and therefore, we need to recall what we want to achieve with onion routing in the first place. So, of course, we want our onion routing to hide who the sender was and who is communicating to whom. This especially means that from the early onion layers, so the ones that Alice sent, the adversary cannot be able to deduce anything of the included later path after the honest relay or the included message. Similarly, on the receiver side, well, just seeing the onion layers at the end of the path, the adversary cannot be able to deduce anything that happened before the honest relay. Further, if the receiver is honest, we also want the adversary not to learn the final message that is included in the onion. One more thing, if the adversary sees onion layers before and after the honest relay, he should also not be able to tell that they belong to the same communication. So now that we know what we want to achieve, we can start looking at the first onion routing property. And therefore we want to protect all communications that include an honest sender and at least one honest relay. But for now, let us just stick with the example from the beginning. So the one where Alice is communicating and the honest relay is in the middle of the communication. Now, the first thing that we want to do is unlink the onion layers before the honest relay from the onion layers after the honest relay, which is why we call our first new property layer unlinkability. So how can we make sure that the adversary does not know which onion layers actually belong to the same communication? Well, we lie to the adversary. So instead of giving him onion layers that indeed belong to the same communication, we present him some random ones that only include the same path between Alice and the honest relay. But after the honest relay, they might take a completely different path and include a completely different message. Now we want to figure out whether our adversary could catch us in such a lie, whether he would notice that these onion layers actually do not belong together. So how do we do this formally? Well, we define a game, and in 50% of the cases we give the two onion layers that belong together to the adversary, and in the other 50% of the cases we start with the random onion layers. So we pick one of the two and give it to the adversary. Now the adversary has to guess which of the options was presented to him. And if he can do so with non-negligible advantage, so actually better than just randomly guessing, then we say, well, he must have some idea which onion layers belong together and which other onion layers don't. And therefore we say layer unlinkability is not achieved, and thus the onion routing or mixed protocol is not secure. So let's think about what else we wanted from our onion routing network. Well, we wanted to make sure that early onion layers cannot leak any information about the path or the message included after the honest relay. And let's look at layer unlinkability again. We actually already covered this, as our random onion layers would include a different path and different message than the communication that we have chosen in the beginning. So we already covered this one with layer unlinkability. Let's look at what else we wanted. Well, we wanted to make sure that late onion layers do not leak anything about the history before the honest relay. Well, let's look at layer unlinkability again. This is not already covered, as in both cases the adversary gets to see the same onion layers at the end of the path. Thus, if he could deduce something from them, it would not help him distinguish the cases, and thus it would not help him break layer unlinkability. So we need a new property for this. And the new property that we use for this is tail indistinguishability. So again, we start with the communication that we already know, but this time we only give the late onion layers to the adversary. But he of course knows how the communication looks like, so that these late onion layers should actually belong to an onion that was sent from Alice over the honest relay. And again, we lie to him by creating some random onion layers instead, that have taken a different path to get through the honest relay, but after the honest relay behave just as the original onion layers would. And again, we want to see whether the adversary would catch us in such a lie. So again, we play a game. This time, in the first case, we give him the last onion layers of Alice's communication, and in the second case, we give him the random last onion layers that have taken a completely different path to get to the honest relay, but after the honest relay behave just as Alice's communication. And now we ask the adversary to distinguish those two cases. So let us finally check that we've covered everything that we wanted. First of all, we wanted that early onion layers do not leak information about what happens after the honest relay. This is guaranteed by layer unlinkability. Also, that onion layers before the honest relay and after the honest relay can no longer be linked is guaranteed by layer unlinkability as well. And finally, we wanted that late onion layers do not leak anything about the history before the honest relay, and this is guaranteed by tail indistinguishability. Now, this was just an informal overview of the core idea of our properties. Indeed, there are more details we would have to pay attention to. First of all, the ideal security as defined by Camenisch and Lysyanskaya is indeed an ideal functionality in the UC framework. So what they say is that an adversary does not even get to see the onion layers that are sent around, but instead he only learns random temporary IDs for each subpath between honest nodes. This means that if you want to show that your protocol actually does not leak more information to the adversary than those little pieces of the path, and if the receiver is corrupted the message, then you would have to show that you can simulate all real communications between honest parties for the adversary just based on this subpath information that you get from the ideal functionality. And therefore, as the adversary in the real world, of course, gets to see other communications that are going on and is able to modify packets of onions that he sees or processes. This means that our properties indeed have to be stronger than the ones that we've just seen. And so what I've just told you is just the very core of the properties. So I described how the challenge looked like and how the adversary has to decide based on it. But indeed, our security properties contain much more steps, and most important, the oracles in those properties indeed allow the adversary to see what happens in other communications and also to see what would happen if we would modify an onion. And for those of you that are interested in those details, I of course invite you to read our paper or ask me questions later on. But for all the others, I want you to know that we actually have proven that onion correctness together with our layer unlinkability and tail indistinguishability indeed implies the ideal security of Camenisch and Lysyanskaya. As one final remark, I want to tell you about some limitations of our proof strategy. For this work, we deemed it most important to get the foundations right. So we started from the ideal functionality of Camenisch and Lysyanskaya. However, their senders only send single messages to the receivers, and there is no option for replies yet. And also, if a sender does not only want to send one message to a receiver, but multiple ones, then in practice, often concepts like sessions are used to make this more performant. This is also not included in the model yet. However, even for such protocols, using our properties helps to check that the single case of sending one message is correctly protected. And we deem it possible for future work to adapt our properties to those cases. However, remember that the properties only protect what can be protected from a cryptographical point of view, so you will need additional measures against timing attacks and traffic analysis, even if our properties are proven. So let me quickly summarize what we've covered in this talk. First of all, you learned about the garbage attack, and thereby that some proven secure onion routing and mixing systems are actually dangerously flawed. Then we had a look at the proof strategy and saw that the proposed onion properties are not strong enough to imply the desired security. And finally, you learned how to avoid such flaws in the future by proving our new onion routing properties that indeed imply the desired security. With this, I'd like to thank you for your attention, and I'm curious to hear your questions.